In 2025 alone, Ukraine says it plans to deploy millions of FPV attack drones across the front, and the result is visible on the ground as destroyed shelters, broken supply routes, and scattered infantry units that barely have time to react before impact. Near Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region, this shift has turned a once familiar infantry battlefield into something far more dangerous, where hiding no longer means safety and movement itself can trigger destruction within seconds. This area is no longer defined by tank duels or long artillery exchanges, but by a fast and brutal cycle where a reconnaissance drone spots a target, data is passed in real time, and an FPV drone dives straight in to finish the job. Footage from the area shows Russian soldiers hiding in houses, forests, trenches, and open fields. Yet each option fails once eyes in the sky lock on. What looks like a series of short clips is actually a clear pattern, because these strikes do not aim only to kill, but to erase safe space, break supply lines, and exhaust units before they can regroup. Cheap drones now hunt individual soldiers, collapse field bunkers, and destroy vehicles that once moved freely at night. The deeper story at Pokrovsk is not about one weapon, but about control, because the side that dominates close-range airspace decides when the ground can move and when it must freeze. That reality is forcing a new question onto this war. As modern combat may no longer reward the largest force, but the one that sees first and strikes faster, civilian houses and abandoned buildings around Pokrovsk have turned from temporary shelter into high-risk targets once drones took control of the air close to the ground. Russian soldiers moved into damaged homes and empty structures because these places once offered walls, roofs, and the hope of hiding from long-range sensors. Yet that logic collapsed as Ukrainian reconnaissance drones began to watch every street and courtyard in real time. Once a drone confirmed movement inside a building, the position stopped being a shelter and became a fixed point on a digital map, and that made it vulnerable within minutes rather than hours. FPV drones were then guided straight toward these structures, flying low and fast through broken windows or collapsing roofs, and the blast often erased both the shelter and the unit using it. The presence of constant aerial observation changed how time worked on this part of the front, since a position that looked safe in the morning could be destroyed before nightfall once it was seen from above. Real-time video links allowed Ukrainian operators to confirm targets, adjust angles, and strike with confidence. And this removed the uncertainty that once protected troops hiding among civilian structures. The destruction of these buildings carried a clear military effect because each strike removed a firing point, a rest area, or a small command node that supported Russian movement around Pokrovsk. At the same time, it forced Ukraine into a hard trade-off, because hitting these targets also meant further damage to civilian infrastructure in an area already scarred by months of fighting. Commanders accepted that cost because leaving such shelters intact would allow Russian units to regroup, resupply, and push forward under cover that drones could already see through. This pattern shows how FPV drone warfare blurs the line between cover and exposure, since any structure that hides people also fixes their location once it is observed. Walls and roofs no longer guarantee safety when a drone can pause outside, confirm activity, and then return moments later with an explosive payload. As this cycle repeated, Russian soldiers were pushed into constant movement because staying inside a known building became an invitation to be struck. That pressure drained energy, reduced coordination, and limited how long units could hold ground near populated areas. The scale of this approach matters because Ukraine has openly stated plans to field millions of FPV drones in 2025, which signals that these strikes are not rare events, but part of a sustained system designed to dominate close-range space. In Pokrovsk, civilian buildings no longer slow in advance or protect defenders because once drones confirm they are being used, those structures quickly become targets. Fighting around houses and ruins now reflects a broader change in modern warfare, where staying alive depends less on finding cover and more on avoiding detection under constant aerial surveillance. Russian infantry movement around Pokrovsk has turned into a dangerous gamble once drones began to dominate forests and open ground at low altitude. Units that once relied on trees, uneven terrain, and short dashes between cover now face constant exposure because reconnaissance drones watch these areas without pause and mark every change in position. In wooded zones, soldiers often move in small groups or alone to avoid detection. Yet that choice increases risk rather than reducing it, since a single moving figure is easier for a drone camera to track against a stable background. Once movement is detected, the process accelerates quickly because the same drone or a nearby operator can guide an FPV strike within moments. The critical moment often comes when a soldier leaves a dugout or tries to cross a clearing, because these short transitions create clear visual contrast that drones are trained to catch. FPV drones then follow low paths through branches or above grass, adjusting their angle as the target reacts, and this removes the chance to escape through speed or direction change. Unlike earlier fighting patterns where infantry could depend on armored support or suppressive fire to cross exposed areas, these movements now happen under a sky that responds faster than ground units can coordinate. Heavy vehicles cannot shield every patrol, and fire support cannot arrive in time when a drone strike takes seconds rather than minutes. This reality has reshaped how distance works on the battlefield, because even a short walk between positions can trigger a lethal response. Russian soldiers are often forced to freeze or retreat once they hear the sound of a drone. Yet hesitation itself becomes a problem, since stopping in open terrain fixes their location. Attempts to sprint across fields rarely succeed, either because FPV drones are guided visually and can adjust course as the target changes direction. The forest, once a place to break line of sight, now limits movement options because dense cover restricts running paths and traps individuals in predictable routes. Open ground is even harsher, since there is no vertical protection once a drone descends to strike height. These patterns show that the danger does not come only from the weapon, but from the system behind it, where observation, decision, and attack are linked into one continuous action. Ukrainian units have adapted to this environment by treating movement itself as a target, not just fixed positions, and that shift turns patrol routes into potential strike zones. This approach wears down Russian infantry over time because constant pressure forces units to move at night, split into smaller elements, or delay rotations, all of which reduce combat effectiveness. Fatigue builds as soldiers remain alert for long periods, and coordination suffers when movement must be limited to avoid detection. The absence of safe corridors also affects morale, since every step outside cover carries the risk of immediate attack. What stands out around Pokrovsk is how quickly these drone traps reset, because once a strike ends, surveillance resumes and waits for the next movement. There is no clear front line in this environment, only zones where motion is punished. As Ukraine continues to refine UAV tactics and integrate them across units, infantry movement in forests and open ground becomes less about maneuver and more about survival. The result is a battlefield where traditional ideas of advance and withdrawal lose meaning, and where being seen while moving can decide the outcome before a fight even begins. Field dugouts and forward ammunition caches around Pokrovsk have have lost their role as safe anchors once FPV drones began striking from inside the defense rather than from the edge. Russian units built these positions to survive artillery and small arms fire. Yet they now face a threat that enters through openings, vents, or weak roof sections and detonates at the point of greatest damage. FPV drones and other attack UAVs are guided with live video, which allows operators to identify entrances, confirm activity, and commit to a strike only when the target is fully exposed. This method turns the dugout from protection into a trap because the blast happens where soldiers store supplies, rest, or prepare for the next move. When a forward ammo cache is hit, the effect is immediate and severe because ammunition is not only destroyed but often ignites, causing secondary explosions that collapse the structure. The loss of stored rounds cuts off the ability to return fire and removes the option to hold ground under pressure. Units near Pokrovsk have been seen abandoning positions shortly after such strikes, not because of direct casualties alone, but because they can no longer sustain combat without basic supplies. The tempo of battle changes at that moment since a unit without ammunition cannot delay an advance or support nearby elements. This creates a chain reaction where neighboring positions become exposed as well, because defensive lines rely on shared logistics rather than isolated strength. The danger does not stop at fixed sites because once a cache is destroyed, replacement supplies must move forward along routes already watched by drones. Every resupply attempt becomes another opportunity for surveillance and follow-on attack, which means the problem spreads beyond the initial strike. Russian forces are then forced to adapt by splitting storage into smaller loads or moving supplies more frequently. Yet both options increase movement and therefore visibility. Smaller caches reduce endurance, while frequent transport raises the chance of detection along roads and paths. This cycle shows how drone warfare targets systems instead of single targets because the goal is to disrupt flow rather than only remove people. The presence of constant aerial observation also affects how commanders plan, since large, centralized depots near the front are no longer viable. Even shallow dugouts that once offered protection against shell fragments now face a precision threat that arrives from above and inside. The pressure forces Russian units to rely on temporary positions that are used for short periods and then abandoned, reducing stability and making coordination more difficult. As these positions become less reliable, Russian units spend more time relocating and less time preparing, which steadily undermines overall combat readiness. This dynamic has been noted in broader assessments of the Russia-Ukraine war, where analysts have pointed out that drones are steadily reducing the value of mechanized and static defenses at the tactical level. Around Pokrovsk, that trend is visible in real time as supply points disappear faster than they can be rebuilt. Each destroyed dugout sends a signal to nearby units that no place near the front is beyond reach. The destruction of field shelters and ammunition stores shows how FPV drones are breaking defenses from within, turning the backbone of frontline logistics into one of its weakest points. Simple cover, like trees, bushes, and light materials, has become unreliable once attack drones took control of low-altitude space around Pokrovsk. Russian soldiers often rely on natural features and damaged walls because these options once broke lines of sight and reduced exposure to direct fire. Yet FPV drones have stripped away that protection by approaching from angles that ground threats never could. A tree that blocks a rifle shot does not stop a camera, and a thin wall that hides heat and sound from distance cannot stop a drone that flies close and confirms movement in seconds. FPV drones now move low, through branches, and across uneven ground, adjusting speed and direction as the target reacts, which turns natural cover into a false promise rather than a shield. Once a drone hovers or circles briefly, the illusion of safety collapses because the operator can study shadows, shifts, and small movements that reveal a hiding place. In wooded areas near Pokrovsk, this dynamic has trapped soldiers between limited paths and predictable exits, since dense growth restricts movement while drones track from above. Bushes that once allowed short pauses now create fixed points that draw attention because a body crouched inside them stands out once a drone pauses to look. Ruined buildings offer no better outcome because broken roofs and open sides give FPV drones direct access to interior spaces where troops believe they are concealed. These attacks show that the problem is not only explosive power, but precision and patience. Since drones wait until the moment of highest certainty before committing, ground units then face a hard choice between staying still and risking detection or moving and exposing themselves during transition. Neither option offers safety when drones can search systematically rather than react randomly. This reality forces a shift in shelter tactics because light materials and natural cover no longer match the threat profile of modern UAVs. Units must consider protection that blocks sensors as well as fragments, which raises demands for stronger structures and better concealment methods. Near the front, such materials are scarce and slow to build, which means many positions remain vulnerable by default. As a result, troops rotate more frequently and limit time spent in any single spot. Yet, that constant movement increases fatigue and coordination problems. The battlefield around Pokrovsk reflects this tension because soldiers are seen changing locations often, but still being tracked once drones pick up a pattern. The adaptation race favors the side that controls the air, since every adjustment on the ground can be observed and countered. Reports about new tactical drones entering the war underline this trend, because both sides continue to expand reconnaissance and strike capabilities that operate beyond the reach of simple cover. Longer-range platforms extend observation, while short-range FPV systems finish the attack, creating a layered threat that leaves little room for error. In this environment, cover must do more than block bullets. It must deny detection. Without that ability, trees, bushes, and light walls only delay the outcome by moments rather than change it. The loss of effective concealment reshapes behavior at every level. Because planning now starts with avoiding observation rather than building defenses around Pokrovsk. This shift is visible in how positions are chosen and abandoned with emphasis on unpredictability over permanence. The outdated belief that natural features can reliably hide troops has been replaced by a harsher lesson. Because once drones control the air close to the ground, simple cover becomes a marker instead of protection. Night operations around Pokrovsk no longer provide safety once drones gain the ability to watch and strike without pause. Units once planned movement and resupply after dark because reduced visibility limited observation from the air. Yet thermal cameras and low-light sensors have erased that advantage and turned darkness into another exposure window. Reconnaissance drones now patrol routes through the night, scanning roads, fields, and tree lines for heat signatures that reveal engines, bodies, and even short stops. When a vehicle appears on these feeds, the response is fast because operators can track its direction, speed, and destination before handing the target to an FPV strike team. Supply trucks carrying ammunition, fuel, or food are especially vulnerable since their size and heat output make them easy to detect against cooler surroundings. Motorcycles used for quick movement face a similar threat because their speed does not offset the lack of protection once a drone commits to the attack. FPV drones approach low and adjust in real time, which allows them to strike vehicles on narrow roads where turning or hiding is impossible. A single hit often blocks the route entirely because wreckage and fire force following traffic to stop or turn back. This effect multiplies across the network. Since one destroyed vehicle can delay several units that depend on the same path as routes become dangerous, commanders try to vary timing and paths. Yet, drones adapt as well. Because constant observation reveals new patterns quickly, night movement then becomes a contest of endurance rather than stealth. With drones able to wait longer, then crews can remain alert. The pressure on logistics has direct consequences at the front because units without regular resupply cannot sustain fire or rotate personnel effectively. When ammunition runs low, positions that survived earlier attacks become fragile and must be abandoned sooner than planned. Fuel shortages limit vehicle support and slow evacuation of wounded soldiers, which adds to stress and reduces morale. These outcomes show that logistics is no longer a rear area function, but a frontline activity exposed to the same risks as combat units. The impact is not limited to one strike or one night, because repeated losses force changes in behavior that reduce overall efficiency. Units move less often, carry smaller loads, and accept longer gaps between resupply, all of which weaken their ability to respond to sudden pressure. Drone surveillance also affects command decisions because large convoys become impractical and small deliveries take more time to organize. This shift favors the side that can sustain drone operations continuously, since control of the air close to the ground translates into control of movement below. Analysts have noted that modern conflicts now see drones shaping both attack and defense around the clock, with night offering no real pause in activity. Every road becomes a potential strike zone once it is watched from above. Every delay compounds risk as units wait for safer conditions that may never come. The loss of nighttime safety removes a key planning tool and compresses decision timelines for commanders under pressure. In this environment, logistics becomes a battle of visibility and timing rather than distance. Those who cannot hide their movement lose the ability to support the front reliably. The fight around Pokrovsk shows how drones have closed the last window of safety, because when night no longer protects supply lines, no space on the battlefield remains truly secure. What the FPV drone footage from Pokrovsk often fails to explain is the deeper strategic shift behind every strike, because these are not random hits or short moments of chaos, but part of a system that is quietly redesigning how modern war is fought. Around Pokrovsk, drones have reshaped movement, shelter, and logistics into risks rather than advantages, turning houses into traps, forests into surveillance zones, supply routes into kill corridors, and night into just another exposed hour. FPV drones now decide when infantry can move, where units can rest, and how long positions can survive before being erased. And that control over close-range airspace has become more decisive than armor thickness or troop numbers. This battle is no longer about who fires the biggest guns, but about who sees first, reacts faster, and keeps pressure constant enough to deny the enemy any safe rhythm. What happens next remains uncertain because both sides are adapting under fire, testing new countermeasures, new drone tactics, and new ways to hide in a sky that refuses to blink. The question is not whether drones will shape future battles, but how far this model will spread, and whether armies can regain space on the ground without first winning it in the air just meters above. Pokrovsk may be only one battlefield, yet its lessons point far beyond eastern Ukraine and toward the next phase of modern warfare. What strategy comes after a battlefield where being seen often means being finished is still unfolding? If this analysis helped clarify how drone warfare is changing real battles today, like this report, share it with others, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear coverage on weapons, combat, and the politics behind the fight.